everything I would classify as me dissolved. So thought was gone, feelings were gone, experiences were gone, memories were gone, hopes were gone, fears were gone. Everything had dissolved. And there was a realization that, oh yeah, I'm just as fake as reality. That everything I've ever thought of as me is just as unreal as the rest of the world. What the only thing that was real was this witnessing awareness, was this thing that was aware of what was going on. In the midst of the experience, then came what I would call clusters of information. They were literally just complete totalities of information that would come, burst in front of, in a sense, burst in front of my eyes, and then the next cluster would come. So there was no thought whatsoever, and there was no identity. There was just the witnessing of the information, and the information was instantly assembled. This is, of course, happening in a microsecond as I'm being drilled down the canyon.
I'm here today with Howard Mickoski. What do you do once you find out that everything you have been taught and told is a lie? Howdy Mickoski is the author of books Exit the Cave, Falling for Truth, The Power of Then, and Exposing the Expositions. He began his life as a stand-up comedian and hockey coach, but followed a period of traumas and depression, began to study the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mexico in 1997. This led to the study of Zen, native Indian medicine, alchemy, Gnosticism, and comparative religions. He had a death experience in 2005 that led him to change his research and writing focus, that led to a more philosophical writing that included the nature of reality, simulation theory, Plato's cave, Cathar knowledge of southern France, and reincarnation traps. Howdy, thank you so much for being my guest. I'm pleased to have you here with us today.
Hey, good to see you. How is life treating you today?
Wonderful, wonderful. How about you?
It's about the same as it is every day. Things tend to not change too much in this particular reality, even though they're changing constantly in the external world. Um, so I'm just working to stay sane in an insane reality.
You're the author of several books. Tell me how you got interested in this topic.
You mean exit the cave in general, or because my work started 30 years ago, so it's been a long process of personal examination, spiraling inward and asking questions about external reality. And it involved a number of death experiences. And so I guess before we start, I should say, like I do in every interview that I do, is what I share is a thesis. It's the synthesis of the experiences of my life and the practices that I've done and the teachers that I've had. And I present it so that people can think. I present it so that people can ask some questions of themselves and come up with your own answers. And it's important that the answers you find need to match your experiences. Just because they're in a book or somebody tells them to you is not something that you should believe. You shouldn't disbelieve it either, but it should make you ask some questions. So I always like to throw that at the beginning, that I'm just presenting a thesis. So yeah, what would you like? Would you like a little overview, or would you like some personal information? What's best for you?
Well, let's maybe start with your death experience. What happened there?
Well, I've been I've grown up as a normal kind of person, and I guess normal-ish in Canada. Hockey player, and eventually became a stand-up comedian. So I was a comedian for 20 years. But in the course of that, there were some pretty strong traumas that took place early in my life. One, I had a father who's a psychopath, and so there's multiple small traumas growing up in the household of such a person. But just at the end of my university time, he stole all of my money and made it almost impossible to finish my university degree. And so that was like a first cracking of that reality is here to look after you, or that this is a happy place. As soon as my university ended, I did finish it. My ex-girlfriend was murdered. So right away, I had these two experiences in a very short period of time. And it actually, the best description of it, it threw me out of my normal ability to function in the world for a while, because I had been told that the world is, a wonderful place if you work hard, if you have some faith, if you go to school and you get married and you have a family and you do this, that your life will go a certain way. Well, I just watched a person who was living their life absolutely perfectly. They were doing everything they had been asked to do, and now they were dead. They were 23 years old and dead. And I said, okay, something's wrong with what I've been told. At this point, I didn't really know what, but it was beginning of the process of asking internal questions of coming towards the beliefs and foundational beliefs that I had been told in my life and what reality was. That was the extent of the search, but most of it was just a giant mess of depression for about 2 or 3 years. And in 1997, I got to the point where I wanted to kill myself. I just didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't like, I didn't like my life, and I didn't like me. I didn't like I didn't like who I was becoming. I didn't do it because I couldn't figure out a way to do it that would have been no mess for the person who had to come and clean it up. So I couldn't think of a smooth way to do it. And just in the midst of that, right around my birthday, came a program on Egyptian pyramid building, a NOVA program. And it was like an instantaneous lightning bolt of information, like, okay, that's what you're supposed to do. Ancient Egypt had a knowledge, and you're supposed to go and track it down. The depression lifted, everything lifted instantaneously. And for about 8 years, I went through intense internal practice. I was very lucky, like right from the beginning. I was very lucky with the research I was doing. I was very lucky to have met a Korean monk who I spent about a year with, and then I started time with after my time with him with three different native medicine men on various reserves in Canada, and followed their advice, followed their suggestions of what I needed to do personally in order to transform internally, but more important, to test reality. And that's what I did for 8 years. I tested reality, and reality failed every single time. It was There was nothing solid about this reality whatsoever. It was transparent and non-local, and I no longer could believe in it. But I still believed that I was very real. My book came out in 2004, my first book, and then in 2005, I was hiking in the Canadian Rocky Mountains with a friend, not knowing I was in a very dangerous location just above Johnson Canyon, a giant. I guess at that time it was almost like a river moving into the canyon, into the waterfall, and fell in. Stupidly fell in, actually. And in the experience, realized that this is where I was going to die. That this was now I was dying. And what was so unique to me about it, as I looked afterwards into other experiences, was I had no interest in wanting to keep living. I had no interest in needing to live. I was comfortable. Okay, this is where I'm going to die, and I'm just going to have front row seats for it. There's just no problem with it. In the course of that acceptance, everything I would classify as me dissolved. So thought was gone, feelings were gone, experiences were gone, memories were gone, hopes were gone, fears were gone. Everything had dissolved. And there was a realization that, oh yeah, I'm just as fake as reality. That everything I've ever thought of as me is just as unreal as the rest of the world. What the only thing that was real was this witnessing awareness, was this thing that was aware of what was going on. In the midst of the experience, then came what I would call clusters of information. They were literally just complete totalities of information that would come, burst in front of, in a sense, burst in front of my eyes, and then the next cluster would come. So there was no thought whatsoever, and there was no identity. There was just the witnessing of the information, and the information was instantly assembled. This is, of course, happening in a microsecond as I'm being drilled down the canyon. Because I had swam, I had initially swam back to the bank because my friend was there, and as I grabbed his hand to try to pull myself out, I pulled him in too. So we were now both in the river, and that was the exact moment when I said, "Oh, well, this is where I'm going to die," because now I've just pulled my on-land savior into the water with me. So after I'd had this multitude of experience, another thought cluster, and I don't call it again, it's this cluster came up, and it said, "Well, if I don't get out, how's my friend going to get out?" And at that point, I hit a boulder. I wasn't like flat swimming. I was straight up, and I slammed into a boulder. with my leg. It veered me a bit off course, close enough that I could realize that I was in a shallow part of this river. Was able to crawl out and was trying to figure out how I'd get my friend out when I realized he was crawling out too. And we both sat there for a couple hours and we were silent. And then we discussed our experience together, which was ultimately similar. His experience was almost exactly the same as mine, from the acceptance, the destruction of his identity, and all that was left was an unbelievable calmness and a lack of fear. And this existed for about 6 months. And then it started to get confusing and difficult because there's an integration period that you have to take or something like that. I didn't take the integration period. I'll get to the point where I'll shut up and let you ask questions. Um, that took me about 8 to 10 years actually to finally begin to integrate the experience and what was being shown to me there, which was a lot of the experience I was rejecting, because it didn't have a happy end, it didn't have a happy side to it, and I was rejecting that. I still wanted the happy ending. Eventually, when I started to come out of that in 2019, I wrote a book on that experience and all of the practices I'd done and the teachers I had that was following for truth. The same year, exposing the expositions on the examination of the world fairs in the 1800s and the lies of history, basically, came out, and that began the process of starting YouTube channels and interviews and all sorts of things that have been going since. And around 2022, I got pushed to write another book. I had a feeling it was time to write another book, and I was going to originally write on Plato's Cave, which I thought was something that people at the time were very interested in. And it just moved very quickly into the recognition that our reality is not at all what we think, that it's a type of trap for the soul. And that Exit the Cave came out in 2022 and began an entire process of discussion, of which we'll get to here eventually. And now I'm in the process of finishing what you would call the second book of that. Has been a slow process, but it's almost done. And there's the short overview for you and everyone, and you can take that wherever you would like to go.
Yeah, so that feeling of peace lasted for about 6 months, you said? How,
Mhm.
where from that feeling of peace do you get like a soul trap? Because that doesn't sound like a very peaceful and nice place. How did you
Exactly.
bring
And
that
that was a
peace
huge,
with you?
no, well, you don't, because there's actually nothing within this reality to be peaceful about. To start with, peace, the peace comes through um, unbelievable seeing of how reality really is and what you are not. Um, so coming out of an experience like that, and I call it a death experience, not a near death experience, because the thing actually died. The thing I think of as me was actually died in the canyon, and there was a new thing that crawled out. And the problem with an experience like that, why it takes integration, why it takes, and I recommend it if this happens to somebody or has recently happened to you, the best thing now that I can recommend is you take like 2 or 3 months pretty much by yourself, just be alone and just sit with it and just take time to contemplate what it might mean, what it doesn't mean, and be okay with what you see. I moved into the world too quickly. And when you move into the world really quickly, an experience like this will shatter the egoic self. It shatters the personality, but it doesn't actually kill it. It just makes it very, very weak. Hence the peace for some time. But eventually, the ego is going to reorganize, and often it will reorganize around an idea of importance or specialness or self-importance. That's usually how ego builds itself. Why I'm better than somebody else, and it did that for a while. But as it was building this self-importance around me, it was conflicting with what had been shown in the midst of the experience, and that led to pretty much a 10-year illness. I was pretty much sick for almost 10 years between starting about 2007 2017. And it was, as some people know who come through similar things like this, it's an experience where I saw every doctor, every shaman, every acupuncturist, every healer. Everyone gave me a different diagnosis, a different way of fixing it. None of them worked. Zero, none. And it was kind of when I got to a place of inner acceptance with what I'd been shown of what reality really is, that it kind of just started to go away on its own. that it literally just it fixed itself. And that was what it really was going on. I was in a 10-year battle within because I was still holding on to that standard story that everyone gets fed as a child, that we live in a world that was made by a loving God who cares about us, who's here to look after us, and who will give us a school, a type of school and a place of learning where we'll have experiences and eventually we'll perfect ourselves and rejoin this wonderful God in a happy, loving, light experience. And now over time, I've come to see now that more like a Cathar or Gnostic, that this is the opposite. It's actually a realm made by an evil God, an evil deity who is created a world and then trapped what the Gnostics call divine sparks, pieces of the soul, which were brought into this realm quite sneakily to power it. It's quite an amazing, sick thing that if you have a gigantic computer, which is a way to describe this reality, it's a giant AI computer simulation. Um, it's not actually a simulation; it's a metaphor. But something this vast on all the multiple dimensions, all the multiple possibilities, all the multiple realms needs a tremendous amount of power. Well, it's brilliant if you can get the characters in your video game to be the ones to power the video game to keep it going. And that's actually what's going on. There's this gigantic, bizarre energy extraction process that's really only designed to keep the system running. And unfortunately, we have been put in this system and been deceived for a long, long time. And the few people who talk about this over the course of history um, tend to be ignored or ridiculed. But there's a few now who are bringing this up. I think the last 4 years and the insanity of the last 4 years has been so obvious to so many people that, well, the world's insane. It's now obvious. They didn't see it 10 years ago, but now all you have to do is look out your window and see what the entire world is doing. It's insane. So now a message like this is easier to get across to people because it's like they have personal experience of, yes, the world is crazy. And wow, it's always been crazy. And that's, I think, that's the real dividing line is when people start to really begin to say, it's always been crazy. I just never noticed it until now.
How are we tricked into coming here?
Difficult story because it depends on which sort of set of creation myths you look at, whether it's specific gospels of the Nag Hammadi, for example. Some Hindu texts will have a slightly different variation on it. The ancient Egyptian creation myths have a slightly different, but simplified. If we simplify the story, you can say that once this universe was created by what the Gnostics refer to as a fallen creator, Lucifer, they named it Yaldabaoth. Cathars called it Rex Mundi, king of the world. It was the creation that he attempted to make was lifeless, and there are beings because there's in sort of this ancient belief structure. There's I wouldn't they wouldn't call it a good god or something. They would call it an absolute reality or a totality, and that totality exists outside of this entire system, outside of the matrix. So this creation is something within the totality, but it's a very separate walled off place. And when the walled off place, the matrix, didn't live, um, you might say help was asked for from outside, and certain beings or a being or a light source or power source, whatever, known as a divine spark in their terminology, came in to help. This place was powered. It did get its energy through the divine spark, but then the creator didn't let the sparks leave. In some Christian terms, they might say we're being held ransom as hostages, and there's hence the ransom stories of Christ in Timothy and Matthew, I think. So there's so many different possible pieces to this story that exist in various religious texts all through history. The problem is the texts, of course, have been so altered, so changed, and more importantly, the translation of these texts from their original language into more Western languages are so opposite to a lot of times what they say in their original language, that it's been very easy to put a deception into people. And once the deception is in, it's very hard to unravel it. So, I mean, again, I was lucky to have had the people that I spent years with who were very challenging to be around. Mr. Park, the Korean monk, was very, very challenging. He pushed us very, very hard. The same with the native medicine people. They were not playing around with stuff. They took wisdom seriously, and they demanded a certain level of commitment, a certain level of courage and honesty to go forward. And they were testing you all the time to see if you would go through. So I was very, very lucky that early on I met people like this who still followed an ancient tradition, that weren't living off the satsang lecture circuit and weren't running workshops on the weekend. I mean, these were people who pretty much lived in poverty in the area where they lived in, doing the service that they come to learn through their tradition. And I was, like I say, very, very lucky to have learned from them, even though I wished I had learned more, and I wished I was more aware at the time and was asking better questions. But I now see, after 25 years, that they've kind of been in their own way guiding the last 25 years I've been running, based on what you might say the pushes that they gave me, that has taken me sometimes 20 or 25 years to understand what they were actually talking about. So I'm very grateful for the time that they gave me, and I'm grateful for I was aware enough to say yes to what they were offering.
What are some of the events in history that point us in this direction, where they got their their wisdom and their knowledge from?
Where did they get it from? Well, of course, they got it from their own internal seeing and their own internal. Everything has to be one's own experience. Like, you can't read it in a book. You can't be told it. It must. So everything I talk about all comes as a personal experience. It all comes as something that I did. And uh, for example, for those 8 years before I had that would be my second death experience, actually, the one in the canyon. Um, I was pushing myself to extreme levels. I was putting in 16 hours a day, probably, of practice, and was doing very, very. I was doing a life recapitulation that took me 4 years to complete. There was gazing. There was walking. There was dreaming exercises. There were body experiences. There were a ton of things I was being pushed for. The most important thing, though, I was lucky not to, that I was told not to start doing, was to look for being happy. You don't want to be happy. You're not looking to enjoy anything. You want an answer. And that's a completely different thing. And the problem is, most people who are involved in spirituality are get involved in it one way or another because of suffering. This is a realm of suffering and a realm of trauma. And unfortunately, a large number of beings in this reality experience huge amounts of trauma. So it's only natural. I kind of started in the same point. I was like, I wanted to get through some of my trauma as well. I wanted to feel like I could enjoy the world. But yet underneath it all, there was a need that I needed to have an answer. And it was, I guess, for me, without even knowing it 30 years ago, it was, how can a world run like this? How can something so crazy exist? And I needed an answer. And so that was underneath the need for feeling better. And so I was really lucky to have that as my guiding underneath, as like a tone. And that commitment is the most important thing that anybody can take with them, as far as I'm concerned now. That the commitment you have, which a teacher from West Virginia called a vector. He said your commitment will literally take you to where you want to go, but you have to know what you want, and that's the first step. Most people don't really know what they want. They think they know what they want, but they don't really know what they want. So step one is always actually digging into yourself. Well, what do I really want? I mean, I say I'm doing all these things, or I'm doing these practices, I'm reading these books. Why? What do I think I'm going to get out of it? And so step one is really defining what it is you want. And once you define what it is you want, you move yourself literally in that direction. And that's what I was doing in my Egyptian days, in my Egyptian study days. It was very easy to make decisions because if I came up to somebody and somebody had it, well, do you want to do this tomorrow? And my thought was, well, is this going to help me know more about ancient Egypt or not? If the answer was no, I didn't do it. If the answer was yes, I did. So my decision process became very, very easy because of the commitment. And once in a while, I followed something else that wasn't part of the commitment, but thankfully I figured it out pretty quickly and just said no and moved on. So the commitment is one of the most powerful things that it's magical, actually. Commitment is magical. I'll tell a story. I have lots of stories, so I'll tell a story. So with one of the medicine men I was with, Bruce Starlight, he's a Sutina Blackfoot in Alberta. We were going to sweat lodges. This was early on, and a bunch of whites. We were allowed to come to sweat lodges every Sunday. So we would come down to the sweat lodge on Sunday. So one Sunday we'd come down. This is maybe 2 months, maybe a month or two. I've been going, and Bruce had no fire going, and he was standing there waiting for us. I said, "Oh, it's time to clean the sweat lodge." And the people who I was with got very, very upset. And they were getting very angry, and a bit of a fight kind of actually started. We'd come all the way from Calgary. We're out here for a sweat lodge, clean the sweat lodge tomorrow. And well, no, it's time to clean it. So they got together and they had a discussion and they decided, well, they're going to go for a walk. It's a really beautiful area out near the Rocky Mountains. And they asked me, do I want to go? Do I want to walk with them? And I turned to Bruce and I said, do you need help cleaning the sweat? He said, yeah. I said, okay, I'll stay here. So, and the course, as soon as we started taking down the sweat. We just took it down. But he's for the first time started explaining to me symbolically what the ties were, what the string were, what the willows represented, what the door represented, what the directions represented, what the fire represented. He started telling me the complete detail of what a sweat lodge is and how it's built and what it does symbolically. And then he said, we clean sweat lodges because it holds the sorrows and the pains of the people who come to it. And when you clean a sweat lodge, you release all that for good. And then he said, so I guess the other people who didn't stay really like their pain. And then he reminded, it's good that you stayed. And it's an example of commitment. I'd made a commitment to be there and be a part of the sweat lodge. And whether I was asked to do something or not, I was going to be there. And that commitment led me to actually learning properly the first information about what a sweat lodge is. So it's just a small example of how commitment will drive you into places you weren't expecting if you don't sort of cave into something else that just makes you feel better, that you make a commitment and you just go along with it.
You studied history, ancient Egypt, and so forth. What did you find there? Did you find evidence of this kind of soul trap?
Well, yes, but I didn't really pay attention to it at that time because I still was holding on to the idea um, that things were better in the ancient world, and they slightly were. It's not that they weren't. Things were a little more, we'll call it sane in certain areas of the ancient world. But I was holding on to that belief that there was a time when things were better, and if we just do a few things differently, it can be like that again. Pretty standard belief in the world. So I'd held that for quite a while, but there's information that was waiting there that I was kind of ignoring. Um, Things based on, for example, the specifics of the way pyramids were built, how they were structured, what was going on energetically with them, various temples. I ignored in the early stages the destruction of all of these sites. They were obviously blown to bits, and in fact, to the point of like many of the sites have melted granite. Like I don't know if you realize, but the kind of temperature that's required to actually melt granite, and so these things were um, literally burned to pieces. And I should have been asking incredible questions just even then, like, well, how do you have burned granite on Abu Sir? And what's even more bizarre is there's sites on Abu Sir that there'll be a room that has granite interior, and then it has a limestone exterior. So the room is granite on the inside, it's limestone on the outside. The inside granite has been burned, has been melted, but the outside limestone, which is softer, is not burned, has not melted at all, which means the heat came from inside. Not you say, well, it was some sort of plasma burst, or it was something from the sun. It's like, well, actually, Egypt tells you that it was inside the temples that actually burned and melted, and outside they were fine. So there were so many of these things, whether it was there, whether it was in Mexico or any of the other sites that were leading me potentially to, because the mythology indicates soul trap. The mythology indicates that there is a that we are we are trapped without even knowing that we're trapped. Bizarrely, of course, like I talked about in the canyon experience, but at the same time, we're not trapped because there's nothing to be trapped. It's a very bizarre paradox, and both sides of the story are true. And often somebody will do very well um, holding on to one side of this, sort of a very, particularly now Advaita or Zen side of which no self, you don't exist, the world isn't real, it's all an illusion. And then on the other side, well, it's a soul trap. There's just this deeper part of ourself which is caught in here. Both of those sides are true. And some will say, well, you have a very negative outlook. And actually, it's the opposite. I think it's unbelievably positive because the end result is finding the truth and the totality of what we are and the absolute power and the completeness of that which we actually are. The problem is there's been so many walls of false, so many walls of garbage that have been placed over everything in the course of our lives. And if we want to get to what's behind the walls of garbage, that's very painful and it's very difficult to have to wade through all that and to wade through particularly people's beliefs and hopes. But on the other side of that, I've now found is actually more amazing than I could have ever believed. It sounds negative on the surface, but the end result of the seeking through all of that is actually an incredible, um, we'll call it, I don't want to call it stillness. That's not the right word. Let's call it comfort.
Comfort is a good thing.
Contentment. There's the word, contentment.
I think that's something we're all searching for, especially on the spiritual path. Um, well, and just living in general, going to work and making money to provide and have a home and things like that. So there's two sides of the coin, both equally true. Tell me more about this side where everything's an illusion. What does that mean for us here and now?
Well, it's something that people should ask questions about. It's something that, it's that question of, and usually it needs to start with reality. People will read a book, they'll read an Asian text and say, well, the world's an illusion. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean the world's an illusion? Usually it gets twisted in such a way to say, well, I'm perceiving it in such a way, the chair is red, but it's really green, and I'm perceiving it a certain way. So I just got to make my beliefs better. And it's usually about changing something because people tend to want and have been propagandized to focus on creating your reality. This idea that you can have what you want, all you have to do is wish for it hard enough. And it's made a lot of people billions of dollars, but it really hasn't changed the world any at all. And most people's lives are not that much better. Not that you can't actually do that, not that you can't actually influence reality in a huge way. It's just that once you get to a certain point, you realize that you don't actually care. It's an illusionary realm, so it really doesn't matter one way or another. You 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 stop trying to fix the world, you might say, and you focus just on where you are and your environment, some small people in that are exist around you, and you can have great transformative powers. But your energy starts to get wasted as you go further out. But the point of your getting to the point of your question, finally, um, it becomes this sense of like, okay, how do you test it? Someone's listening right now say, well, okay, this guy says the world's an illusion. So somebody that should stir some people to say, okay, I'm curious. What do I do? Like I say, I took 8 years for it. I can tell you it got to the point, talking about chairs, it got to the point where I had to hold on to chairs before I sat down because I wasn't sure it would still be there when I sat down. Everything in reality had become so transparent. I was at a girlfriend's house and we were watching TV, and the TV was up against the outside wall. And I said, well, your sister's coming over. Like, what do you mean? Well, your sister just drove up. She's coming home. And then a couple of minutes later, knocks on the door and she opens it up, of course, lets her sister in and says, how do you know my sister was coming over? Well, I saw her. She just parked the car and then she got out and she walked to your door. Howdy, that's a wall. There's no windows in the wall. How could you know that? And of course, at that point, I didn't realize that I was actually not seeing a wall. The wall didn't actually exist. There was a TV and I was just looking outside at the world. I didn't even recognize that the wall wasn't there. And once I realized that, the wall reformed and the wall came back in, and I was back in a fairly standard room. that became my experience for a number of years. It was the reality was quite malleable. Now, someone right away will say, "Well, you shouldn't have been doing as many drugs." Okay, I did none, zero. Right from the beginning of this practice and this work, I knew that there were discussions that drugs would open your way to alternate realities, but I was very, very fortunate that my initial medicine teachers and people I was with said, you need to learn how to enter these altered states of awareness without drugs. Because drugs have a danger to them, that being, yeah, the drug will take you into an altered reality, but you are on the drug's time, you might say. The drug is in control. The experience will happen until the drug kind of tells you it's over. Uh, until it wears off. You are in its control. When you learn how to shift realities on your own, you're in control. And if you want it to stop and you want to change experience and return to where you are, you just stop the experience and you come back. So I was very lucky to have had all of these, learn how to do all of these experiences in a completely, I don't want to call it safe way because it was challenging, certainly, but it indicated to me that it wasn't so real. Now, naturally, I tried to play a bit with the controlling reality, and I began to start recognizing that the story of you can have whatever you want is not actually true. Like, I can start wishing right now to be the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys this year. I can wish and say as many affirmations as I want, and it's not going to happen. I'm not going to be the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. And you begin to recognize that there is a huge template that we never ever realized, a life script or various life scripts that have been placed on us since before we ever got born. This is one of the great things that come out of various I do listen to a ton of near-death experiences, and listen to particularly pre-life experiences, pre-birth experiences. Those are very valuable. And two of the things they talk about a lot, right? One side is these life scripts that are, in a sense, people are pressured to accept. They're usually given some reason. Oh, you weren't loving enough in your last life, so you need to learn like this. You need to have these terrible experiences. So you just say yes to this terrible thing to happen to you. That's one side. The other side of these very strange contracts that are made between the soon to incarnating soul and these beings, which are always, again, usually not like any contract. It's never in your best interest, right? The bank or whoever else, the contract is never helping you. It's helping the bank that's writing the contract. So it's the same thing here. So as we begin to recognize that we have these bizarre life scripts that are like record grooves that have been set up for our life, it becomes easy to start to see how manipulated we've been, that beings are actually manipulating our life. And I know a number of experiences now looking back through my life recapitulation that I thought I was making a choice. Like I thought, oh, the world is giving me a direction that this is a good way to go, and thinking, well, synchronicity, because of course this is another thing from the 1990s, right? This idea of synchronicity and coincidence, it's there to help you. It's God talking to you or something. And now I've come to realize usually once in a while, it can be your own deepest inner truth revealing something to you, but generally, it's one of these archon demonic beings trying to get you onto one of their life scripts. Very similar to the movie Adjustment Bureau. If anyone's seen that movie, everyone thinks the Adjustment Bureau has a really happy ending. That Matt Damon at the end chooses the girl that he wants, Emily Blunt, and these hat men say, "Yes, go ahead, you can have your girl." But actually, they reveal at the end of that movie that, oh, that used to be one of your life scripts, and something had changed a little before. But if you want to be with her, go ahead. He really still didn't make a choice. He really still chose one of the original life scripts. He didn't actually go off and create his own experience. It's the same as being told for breakfast, do you want cereal or do you want toast? And you're like, well, maybe I want something else. Well, these are your choices. That's it. What do you want? That's not really choice. That's a very limited opportunity based on a very tight thing. That's not the totality of possibility we're told that this realm is, and actually is. It is actually a realm of totality. But when you start to realize how often we're being manipulated and moved around, this happens a lot in dreams. I notice this will happen a tremendous amount of my dreams, where I will have a dream, usually with somebody who had been close to me, someone I dated, a close family member, really good friend. They're in my dream. So naturally we feel very, what's the word I'm looking for? We feel very connected and safe, so we instantly interact. They're not strangers to us. And we have these experiences, but then I wake up, and it's happened many times, and I'll start having really weird thoughts in my mind, like just kind of almost insane. And I have to start tracking, like, where is this coming from? I stop where, and then I realize, oh, dream I had last night. That person in my dream, right? That's a demonic being inserting itself in my dream to get me to believe something a certain way, that by using this screen, which is what happens in the near-death experience, unfortunately, is I'll stop talking there, and I'll let you ask a new question so that I can allow you to come in. Sometimes I get on these rambles and I just don't stop, so I'll shut up.
So tell me more about these scripts that are placed in our head and then the totality of it. How can we access that totality and move off script?
I think we all know that there are a type of life script, or you can call it we can call it destiny, call it whatever you want. I mean, people will say that there are events that were destined in my life to happen, or you go through things like deja vu, or um, so in their own way, people recognize that everything is not random. There are at least certain events in one's life that they can say this was, it was destined. It was scripted to happen, right? Some of those things turn out to be very good for us. Some of those things turn out to be very bad for us. But they feel like they were beyond our control. So now we have to step back and start to wonder, if that's true, then the question starts to become, well, how much of our life is that? How much of our life is scripted? Like, to the point, the tea that I just made, is that actually scripted? Was that scripted in some place that I was going to make a tea in the middle of this conversation? I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm saying that's a question we don't really ask very much. We don't ask the extent. Once we see that something is scripted, the next logical step should be how much is scripted and how much isn't. And to the point, how could we tell the difference? How could you tell the difference when you are actually not following a script? Um, that kind of leads us to something Mr. Park used to talk to us about a lot when we were down visiting him. He came out one time when he first started this part of the practice, and he asked us to sit, because we would do a sitting, I like call it meditation, because he didn't call it meditation. It was just a sitting still. And he said, I want you to think of nothing but nothing. And then he left. Okay. So we started thinking about nothing. And he came back in and asked, what are you doing? But we're thinking about nothing. He said, I didn't ask you to think about nothing. I asked you to think of nothing but nothing. And he left again. And so we were confused for quite a while. And we started wondering, what is he talking about? And because it's interesting, because the language is very interesting. I want you to think. So it means he doesn't mean he wants you not to think. He wants you to think. So he wants thinking involved. He wants you to think of nothing. In this case, meaning only one thing. So he wants you focus. I want you to think of nothing. So if you hear the statement, it means only think of nothing but nothing. So it means he wants us thinking only about nothing, or nothingness, or emptiness. None of us really understood what that meant at the time. It was fully revealed to me in the canyon what that is, what emptiness is. Emptiness, it's the scary thing, right? When the average person comes across this idea of no self or nothingness, which is thought of by the mind as being bad or scary because there's no thing, nothing, no thing there. But it's also at the same time, it's totality. It's everything. Nothing and everything is two sides of the same absolute. Generally, people will get who have this, who reach such a realization, have one side or the other. They'll either have the everything side or they'll have the nothing side. Each side on its own brings positives and negatives. But like everything, when you want to transcend duality, so the question being, how do you reach a totality? Well, totality transcends duality, and you transcend duality by having to see both sides absolutely clearly and accept both sides, good, bad, up, down, left, right, nothing and everything, life and death, and then put yourself in the exact middle between them. Richard Rose called this place betweenness. And he used the example of, if you take two equal magnets and you place them apart from each other, you can take a piece of metal, and in the exact midpoint, it will just be suspended between the magnets indefinitely. The power is in this between point. It's in everything, in thought. It's not the thoughts where the power is, it's in the gap between the thoughts. And if you learn how to put, this is one of the tricks of manifestation, if you learn how to put what you want in the gap between thoughts, things can actually start to happen because that's where the power is. So everything is involved on, you might say, having one foot on one side, one foot on the other side. One foot is in the matrix, one foot is out of the matrix. And meanwhile, your awareness is equally in the middle of everything. So it begins you begin that as a basic practice of everything that you're doing is how to live your life in such a way where you are, and I don't want to say balanced because that will be taken by people to be something other than it is. It's to live in such a way where you are where you're instantly not accepting or rejecting what's going on in your reality. You're taking it in as possible experience of awareness, and then you're going to sit with it, you might say, and go through it. What does that mean? That's the beginning points of walking your way to a totality, I think. And totality just means it accepts everything, right? Totality is everything. And most people want the totality that has all the good stuff and doesn't have the bad stuff, but that's not totality. Totality is light and dark. It's the yin yang. It's totality is the yin yang symbol, the everything intermingled, and then realizing that at the same time there is no yin yang symbol. It's just a projection of, it's just a mental projection. So all of that is eventually what you might say where this can lead. Again, I'm not saying you should be doing what I do. You should have done my path. It's every path is personal. Every path is needs to be designed for each person. No one can have a system. No one can have an organization that can just give you some rules and instructions and tell you what to do. Everyone's life is very personal. Everyone's life is very difficult. Everyone's life has their own personal traumas. You and I have talked off screen. Yours has your own traumatic experiences that you've had to go through. And so the life path you live to potentially find your totality has to take in those traumatic experiences as part of the work that would be different from somebody else's experiences. Um, yeah. And then there are a few people in the world, amazingly, who've had great parents, wonderful lives. Everything's been perfect. They've never had like one terrible thing happen to them or anyone close to them. So if someone like that is listening to me, they'll think I'm insane. I think I'm nuts because it just their experience doesn't match it. But in terms of exiting the matrix, exiting the cave, if you're having a happy dream, you want the dream to continue. You only want to wake up and end the dream when it becomes a nightmare. So those who might move to the kind of things I'm discussing have had some sort of nightmarish experience in their reality, and that's making them ask really deep questions. And one of the reasons I even still talk about this is because a lot of people have had these kinds of experiences, these kinds of feelings, these kinds of seeing in the course of their life. But because everywhere they've gone around them has told them a completely different story, a completely different idea, they've actually thought they're crazy. There's something wrong with them because 10,000 people around me are telling me this, 500 books are telling me this, everything else is telling me this, but I experienced something completely different. So they think something's wrong with me. So now they can hear somebody else who is kind of, now it's taken me years, but I've come to a fairly integrated, grounded place with all of this. It's saying it's one of the things that the ancient texts have been talking about for thousands of years, and it's okay to examine these things and think of the possibility of this might be the way reality is, and there might not be anything wrong with you at all. So it's all a part of a gigantic piece of, I guess, what we call spiraling inward, which is that's the next part. If you're looking for totality, everything in this reality is designed to get us to go outward. It wants us to focus on something out there. There's something we need to gain. There's some problem. There's something we need to do. There's something we need to get better. There's somewhere we need to improve. Self-improvement is another example of this entire outward realm. all stopping us from doing this, just looking here. Who or what is the thing that's sitting talking now? Who or what is the thing that's having the experience? Who or what is the thing that is, and when the attention begins to shift, so what's important is here, not there, that's when a really deep process can start. But then we then have to, one of the reasons that the distraction works is because of the inner pain or the inner suffering or the inner trauma that's been faced and hasn't been fully dealt with and integrated. And we know that if we stop and go in, we have to feel this, we have to experience this, we have to deal with this. So it's better to just stay out there, focus on this, and I don't have to go here. But again, as I mentioned earlier, that's just a blocking point to what's beyond. It's just like it's a scary moment. It's a scary piece of the work, it seems, but to actually go through it and clear through something and literally, you might say, dissolve it from our, dissolve like a weight that holds us down. What's beyond it is, yeah, our own true power, our own totality. And once you have your own totality, actually, you can't be trapped. There's no, then at that point, there's no such thing as a soul trap. There's no such thing as a reincarnation trap, because once you're in your own power completely, then there's nothing that can possibly make that what you are do anything other than that what you want to do. But we have to break through all of these layers to again reach that point. So, like I say, it's, to me, it's, there's great potential in all of this. It's just a lot of hard work.
When we reach that point where we don't have to be trapped any longer, do we still have access to our loved ones here? Like, I guess I'm asking, can they help guide us once they have this wisdom and knowledge?
Well, there's nowhere to go at that point.
But I mean, our loved ones, can they come back and guide their loved
When
ones that are still here on the planet and say, hey, this is the direction you need to move? No, we have to figure it out for ourselves.
it's all an inner journey, certain individuals who have reached a particular place can offer a pointer or two, can offer some ideas. That's really all the people I was with offered. They offered me pointers, and they offered ways of figuring it out for yourself. That's the great gift that a real teacher offers, is that they don't tell you something. They set things up in a way where you figure it out for yourself, and then you own it. It's your own personal wisdom. And so you can set up, let's say, you can set up, possibilities for someone else. It's up to them if they'll take it or not. Another example, another Mr. Park example. Some German girls came to visit him. They came all the way from Germany. They were young. They were in their early 20s. They didn't have very much money. They spent the little they had to come out to the West Coast to come and see him. And they he came out of his room to meet them. And this girl, one of the first girls came out and said, "Hi, I'm Andrea from Germany." And he just started screaming at them, "You Germans, all of you, Hitler, all of you Germans, you should all be killed. You're Germans, Hitler, kill you, all of you." And he went back in his room. The girls were, "What have we done? We spent all of our money to come all the way across the world to meet a crazy man. We have to get out of here. What do we get?" And so they have no money. They don't know what to do. So they went downtown and they sat in a coffee shop for a while. And they're trying to figure out, what do I do? And of course, they're young and relatively attractive. So these guys start hitting on them. And she finally says hi, introduces herself, and she says, "Hi, I'm Andrea from Germany." And she realizes that she had kind of put her head down. She had kind of was bowing, like, kind of saying, "I'm from Germany, please don't hate me." They recognized this. Amazingly, they now had somehow they had the awareness of what had just happened. They immediately came back to the house. They called Mr. Park out of the room again. And now this time she stood like fully erect and in inner power, and said, "Hi, I'm Andrea from Germany." And then he said, "Oh, welcome to Hawaii." It was, he was indicating through an experience the way that the egoic structure of her was built. And he did that with me. He did experiences like that with me. And there's the power. That's how you guide somebody. You set things up in such a way that if they're truly aware and serious, they will they'll find what it is you're pointing towards, and they'll take it themselves and they'll move to the next direction. And yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the best we can do with anyone.
Even from the other side, if our loved ones are on these, I guess maybe what I'm trying to get at is what happens to us once we know this and we're not trapped any longer. What happens when we die? Where do we go?
Challenging question, because I can't say I know for sure, of course. I mean, I've studied my own experience and my own understanding and various visions and things that have happened. But of course, it seems like we have to get through the idea of, I think, of the standard near-death experience. So the standard near-death experience, which is 90% of the experiences generally, are, white light, feelings of love, dead grandma, Jesus, life review, uh, karmic committee, and that's usually with, of course, a few other things, but generally that's in the main of a near-death experience. And then there's always it's not your time, you have to go back. That's always and we see that it's usually not a choice. It's people are tricked to make that decision initially, but they'll be pressured if not. So we have that experience, first of all, and everyone who's had one of those, first of all, I'm thankful that they present them and that they share them with us. And I think they're genuine experiences. Like I would never think like somebody might say, oh, they're making that up or it's their mind making. No, I think it's a genuine experience. But there's another 10% of experiences that rarely get talked about. These experiences are not so happy and they're not so loving. And in fact, the beings they meet are not dead grandma and Jesus, they're demons. And they start as dead grandma and Jesus and they turn into demons. And they come back and tell their story and they tend not to be accepted very well. So I consider the standard near death experience story to be like going to the dentist, but only sitting in the waiting room. So you sit there and you've had the experience, you read some magazines, uh, the the receptionist comes over and says, "That was it. You can go home now." Great. This is a fabulous experience. This is wonderful. Um, then one goes actually into the dentist and comes back later and says, "Hey, they're drilling in my mouth and they're shooting me up with Novocaine and it's really painful." And then, what are you talking about? What we do is we sit, we read magazines. It's a wonderful experience. Now, if the death experience is actually the complete eating of one's energy, which is what I now think it is, that really dying is about the complete destruction of what you just were and the preparation for the reincarnation trap, which is to put you back into this suffering pit of hell again, which is what I call this reality, a suffering pit of hell, put you back into the suffering pit of hell again, um, then you don't want anyone to know that. You want to, in a sense, have a marketing campaign that makes it sound like it's going to be fun. It's going to be wonderful. And so, really dying without awareness might be a very difficult experience and will lead to being back into this reality again. Now, that doesn't necessarily, when I say reincarnation, it doesn't necessarily mean being reincarnated into a new being, the standard thinking of Asian thinking. I've had the experience of watching myself die in a parallel reality, or you might say a looping reality. So I know that there's a million versions of me living a million different, slightly different lives. Um, and so this idea that you might actually be reincarnated back into your own body, you might literally, the reincarnation process might be back to being you at age 3 and start again, back to age 3 and be again, which makes sense if some try to say that, well, really what this is whatever they want to call God, is wanting experiences. And so that's why God is materializing itself in this form so it can have experiences. Well, that doesn't make sense if you only live one life. That's a very limited amount of experiences. But it would make sense if every so often in a million different lives, you have one or two things slightly different, you would have a massive experiences. So I consider this reality beyond a soul trap and beyond an energy powering stealing device. I also consider it data collection. It's a giant data collection of experiences. And that would make sense then to have someone live a million or 10 million of the same life over and over and over again. It's one of the reasons I always see some people will say, well, wouldn't it be best to just kill yourself and get out of here and end the whole cycle? And the point being, well, if you haven't reached the totality and you don't have ultimate, what you might call ultimate truth going, you will one way or another be deceived just like you've been deceived every other time. And you might not even be deceived back into a different body. You might be coming back into your same body again. So you're not really ending the suffering at all by committing suicide. All you're doing is stopping it for a short period of time and potentially restarting it again, and maybe even with something worse. So my suggestion is always, no matter how difficult things are, and there are people right now whose lives are difficult and horrific. If I think if people in the world really understood how widespread the suffering is, like this second, and not just for humans, but for worms, for mice, for birds, for deer, for whatever else. Think of how many worms have just died in the last second to feed all of the birds. How many mice have just been, died in the last, like, any realm that's been set up. It's crazy when you think about it that a realm has been set up where you have to eat something else to survive. Um, a truly loving God could have created a completely different place, could have created a place where energy moved in a completely different way, where you literally didn't have to kill something just to keep living. So all of these things for me began to indicate that something is wrong with this place. The other thing that's wrong with this place, as I mentioned in that first chapter that you read, is the memory wipe. The memory wipe is a really big problem because that was the number one indicator when I could realize life is not a school. Because for anything to be a learning experience, you have to remember it. I touch the stove is hot, I remember it hurts. So the next day, I don't touch the hot stove. But if every day you keep having to touch the hot stove because you don't remember and keep burning yourself, that's insanity. And that's our reality. Because we never remember, all of these lives that we've lived have learned, therefore, we've actually gained no experience of anything that we've done. We're going to do the same thing life after life after life after life. If this was really a place of school, we would remember all of them in their totality. But even more so, what's being wiped, I think, is the death experience itself. So some people do remember some of their bits and pieces of other lives, multiple lives, ultimate experiences, and especially young children, which is why I came to believe one way or another the reincarnation story is quite true. But exactly how it works, and it's all up for question. But one of the things that's wiped out is the death experience itself. We don't really get that. So what do I think will happen if you have reached your totality? When you reach your totality, then you're in your complete authority and the only thing that is true is what you are. Everything else is a projection of either yourself or a projection of the matrix itself. It's Neo being in the matrix and knowing that everything around him is a projection. So therefore, when you know it's a projection, nothing can trick you. There's no possible, there's nothing terrifying enough that would frighten you. There's nothing wonderful and loving enough that you would accept at that point because you know it's all a projection. So when you're at a point where, in a sense, nothing can tempt you and nothing can scare you, then you become liberated. Um, the basic story of the monks, right? The monks would live such a life where they dealt with the seven deadly sins, meaning temptation. So they got rid of all temptation. And within that, also, they're removing all fear. So there's the great stories of all of the great religious teachers, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Jesus, whether it's St. Anthony the Hermit. There's always these stories of massive either temptations from the devil, Satan, offering them whatever they would most want to have all of their things wished for, or providing them the most horrific terror. And their great power was to see through all of it and to be still and to not move towards the temptation and not move away from the things that are fearful. And that's the great power that would take us through to the end, to the other side of the matrix, which is just back to that which we are. And that's the good point. We don't really have to go anywhere. It's where we actually already are. You might say where we are is just in a coma. Like, it's not the Howdie thing that has to wake up. I've talked about this in a couple of videos that I've done. I don't have to wake up because the Howdie thing is a fictional character in a movie. I'm just an actor in a movie. But that which is projecting this thing. That's the thing that's in the coma. That's the thing that's asleep. That's the thing that has to wake up. Exactly how that works for this thing, hopefully it works out fine for the actor in the movie. But all that matters is that which I really am. That's which is in the coma gets out of the coma, and once that happens, then nothing can keep you there, unless you choose to. If you choose to stay, sure, but nothing would be able to trick you to stay if you don't want it.
Are we ultimately tricking ourselves as everything that we are experiencing around us is a projection?
It's a yeah, it's an amazing thing to realize, that's yeah. Um, so it's bizarre. It's the statement that, um, you can move mountains, but the mountains have to be agreeable to be moved. Um, that the reality is not real at all, and yet we have the experience of reality. And so we have to, you were talking about, you have to go to work, you have to get some money, you have to do this. Well, you realize I may just be a projection, but I'm an actor in a particular movie. I'm a character on a stage play. And from the standpoint of the whole stage play, they expect the character to do certain things. If the character doesn't do those things, it can just be a small part in the movie. But if the actor doesn't show up that day and read their lines, they have to change the whole movie, right? It's the same thing with where we are here. So we realize what this really is, but that doesn't mean we stop acting. Now we know we're an actor. Now we know what's going on is a story in a production, and we begin to, and it's not you don't practice detachment. This is one of the weird things that these Asian or these very spiritual traditions try to teach you to practice detachment. You don't practice detachment. It shows up from your seeing. You become detached, to the point of, um, what needs to be done right now, and you do it with total awareness. And then when it's done, you just stop thinking about it and move on to the next thing. Um, because it's on the surface, it can sound very terrifying, but I'm sure others can recognize how calming it also is. Also, because our whole life, and I can say speak for me personally, right? I've been chasing goals, chasing various successes, chasing various all sorts of things to make myself feel like I've accomplished something, I've done something, And once I realized, well, it's all a projection. It actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether this succeeds or it doesn't succeed. You get an incredible, calmness to just, well, okay, what do I really want to do then? And it doesn't matter whether it works out. Just what do I really want to do? Well, I'll do that because, you know. So, but at the same time, you don't ignore the reality. I I gained, even though something you see the world's a projection, yes, but I have tremendous empathy for all the projection. I have more empathy now for people, for suffering people than I've ever had. I have tremendous empathy for nature. I have tremendous, literally, I can sometimes feel trees when they're in pain with something, and my first thought is, how can I help? How can I relieve the suffering of some other being in this reality? A very Schopenhauer like thinking, but that's overtaken me completely. Is within the dream itself, I think the best thing one can do is, well, what's the best thing I can do? Just find a way to relieve suffering for yourself or someone else or something else. It's a great gift to the world, whether it's real or not. The suffering is being experienced. The pain is being experienced. So literally, if somebody's bleeding and you have a band-aid, give them the band-aid so they can stop the bleeding. It actually is appreciated. It seems like a small thought process, but it just that has tremendous power. Find ways to alleviate suffering of all beings around you. It sounds very Buddhist, and I guess it is, but, um, I think it's just a natural tendency. And when I recognize that everything is trapped equally, whether it's humans or dogs or giraffes or birds or trees or staplers, or everything in one way or another is part of a projection that they've a false projection run by an AI simulation that they've come to believe is real. Um, and importantly, maybe I'll say one of a few things here and then begin to wrap this up. But I fully believe our simulation is ending. The simulation we have been in, which I don't think has been running all that long, actually. It's one of the reasons I don't study as much history anymore because if you people seem to forget if you live in a simulation, the simulation had a start point. So if the start point was May 9th, 1926, then everything before that date is just backstory to a Westworld robot. It didn't actually happen. It's just implanted information, never even occurred. So because we don't know the start date of our simulation, we don't actually know when we things that we could even call real or not real. How about this for bizarre? What if the simulation started, yeah, May 9th, 2010? That would mean everything from before that day in this simulation that I think of as my life, as my experiences, is again just memories put into a Westworld robot. They didn't actually happen. Only things after that May 9, 2010 were at least considered an experience. These are powerful questions to have to ask yourself of like, how do I know that? What does that mean? I'm not saying it is that early, but that's one element of it. The simulation is ending. I'm fairly clear on that, and it's ending soon. A lot the craziness that's going on in the world is not by accident. All of this insanity that's happening is because those that run this place know it's about to end, and they're getting ready to switch on the new simulation. And everything is being designed to move people, whether they're dead or alive, from this simulation into the next one. And however bad this one was, the next one is going to be worse. The next one is a 5D simulation. So the standards, it's one of the things I've been told in the spiritual community. Oh, we're going to have a new awakening. There's going to be a new wonderful ascension to this 5D reality. Well, D to me is dimension. It means depth, another layer down in the quicksand. So we're going from 3D to 4D to 5D. We're going deeper into the matrix. I think you would want to go to 2D, 1D, oneness, right? Why wouldn't you want to go to 1D, not 5D? But this is going to be there's going to be all sorts of tricks that are going to be played to put us deeper and deeper in the simulation. The good news is because we're in sort of the break point. The one simulation isn't ended yet, the new one hasn't started, and there's like a window, there's a doorway right now. There is an unbelievable opportunity for anybody who wants to really ask serious questions and really dig into serious questions. There's a door open right now, and the worldwide insanity, and the insanity is going to get worse. I hate to tell you that, but in the next few months, it's going to get way worse. But it's all designed to get the focus out there on what's going on and ignore the open doorway. Because eventually, when the new simulation switches on, the doorway will start to close, and the ability to, we'll call it exit the matrix, gets much harder again. So actually, it's the greatest opportunity possible right now. I have known some people who have done in like 2 or 3 months what normally takes somebody 20 years of spiritual work. The ability right now to is just it's like you can just zip light years through experiences now. The possibility is tremendous. And so it's a reminder that again, even though it's difficult and it's going to get more difficult and you might feel alone in the process, there's unbelievable possibility for you right now if you just say, "Where's the door? Where's the window? The whole reality wants me to look there. So where's the place it doesn't want me to look? Look to the place it doesn't want you to look, and you might find something that very pleasantly surprises you."
Howdy, this has been amazing and a great pleasure and honor for me to have you here as my guest. How can my viewers
Thanks.
find your books?
Well, I guess for those that are actually interested to look into them further, I guess just go to my website, howdiemickoski.com. Um, and you can read some sample chapters, and it'll probably take you to Amazon. I guess you don't have to buy them there. Of course, they're available everywhere. The new one, Exit the Cave, is also there as the PDF file because I want to make the book available for so people get it quite cheaply and not have to pay for shipping and all those kind of things. Well, I still have a YouTube channel, and I think there's still 250 videos or something up there. I don't really post much anymore to open forums. Most everything I do now is on a locals channel. A lot of it's there also for free. You just have to sign up as a member. There's a small subscriber part where people can have deeper discussions on these subjects and whatnot. And yeah, the new book I hope is ready in about a month. It's been slow work because the subjects in the new book are very deep, very dense, and I'm finding to find the right words to 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 share it in such a way that I feel that the distortion level will be minimal. It's taken me quite a long time, so I'm hoping that's ready in about a month. And beyond that, yeah, I'm out here in Norway. I live on a farm on a fjord. I get a lot of working on a lot of self-sufficiency and just eating my own food and living off wood that I chop and literally chopping wood, carrying water, and hopefully offering one or two ideas that people can think a little bit deeper and come again to your own conclusions. Come again to conclusions based on your own experiences um, of what reality really is.
Thank you, Howdy. Thank you for being my guest and sharing all this with us today. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I wish you good luck with this, and keep going, keep letting people share their stories. In every story, there's some piece of information that can be useful for someone else. So keep letting them do that and see where it takes you.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.